Are you a busy parent? Do you feel like you're being pulled in multiple directions all at once? Are you exhausted and overwhelmed? Meet my mom. Her name is Santi Tenikela. She's a pediatrician, expert in mind-body medicine, and a life coach. She can help you break free from guilt and overwhelm so that you can enjoy the life that you've worked so hard to create. She can also teach you how to support your family in a more holistic way.
Hello, and welcome to the I Am Well MD podcast. I'm your host, Santhasri Tanikela, and today we have a special guest. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Kristine Goins. She is a board-certified integrative and adult pediatric psychiatrist and digital nomad. Having served in several healthcare settings and various leadership positions within academic centers, Dr. Goins has witnessed firsthand the impact that burnout, stress, and work-life balance can have on physicians' lives. Motivated by a desire to make a difference, Dr. Goins founded Nomad MD, where she empowers doctors to achieve a balanced and fulfilling life where they can work less and live anywhere. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Goins.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to talk with you. I think all of us are interested in this really amazing path that you've created. Tell us a little bit about your path and what inspired you to become who you are today.
Oh, I started really young. I wanted to be a doctor since I was 8 years old. And I also wanted to travel the world since I was a teenager. So I never had the resources, but I would travel through my imagination with a lot of the books that I read as a teenager. And one of my favorite authors, Eric Jerome Dickey, he would write these books with these Black professional polyglots that were like all over the world. And I was always trying to figure out like, how was I going to integrate these two lives together with like medicine and traveling? And I couldn't see it being done. Anyone who's in medicine knows that it tends to become a monopoly of your time and your energy and your resources. It became that for me too, especially during training. And it led to a lot of burnout because I was never fully living the life that I always wanted to live. I was just living one part of it. I thought as an attending, things would be completely different. Like, oh, I'm done. I think a lot of us think that, and then we realize we have more responsibilities, more leadership positions. So really, it just led me deeper and deeper into more burnout. I recognized that what I really needed was lifestyle balance and to reevaluate what was most in alignment for me and my values, which are freedom and peace of mind. And so I had this 5-year plan that I written down to transition from being an attending in academia to traveling the world. One day I just sat down with myself. I changed my 5-year plan to a 5-month plan. I booked a one-way ticket to Colombia and I sent an email to my boss to give them my 4 months before I would leave. And that's how I ended up here traveling the world.
That is so awesome. So I have to ask, can you tell our audience where you are right now?
Right now, I am in Cape Town, South Africa. Just enjoying. I was telling Santi I'm watching the ocean and trying not to get distracted during this podcast because it's just such a gorgeous natural environment.
That's a pretty good problem to have. Like, I'm trying not to get distracted by the ocean. Do you feel like your life is in better alignment than what it used to be?
100%. 100%. Sometimes I'm like, is this really my life? I think it's just a testament to the fact that we really can create lives that are in balance with what we want individually. Like it'll be very personalized, but that it is possible.
And the most amazing part is you have actually planned it all along in some ways, starting from such a young age. You always had these little ideas of what you wanted to do, and it was just a matter of creating the web so that you could actually build the bridge. That's really cool. So, what ultimately helped you to make your decision to pivot to the nomadic lifestyle? Was there a specific incident that happened that caused it all to give way to this decision?
I think it was a culmination of incidences. There was like my own burnout and depression that was really um, just a manifestation of the misalignment that I was experiencing because I knew there was more, but I wasn't living the more yet. At the same time, during the pandemic, both of my grandmothers died, and that really just reminded me that time is of the essence. You think you have a lot of time, but you don't actually know how much time you have. So, though I had made this 5-year plan, I was like, how do I know that I have 5 years? What if I don't? It really gave me that sense of urgency. If I want to live a certain way, I should do it now. There's no other time other than now. I think the other piece was being in a position where I was such in a place of misalignment that I started to have even physical manifestations of this imbalance. I started to have chest pains in the middle of my day that made me feel like I was having a heart attack. I started to have whole body twitches and like abnormal movements, and it sent me to a neurologist's office. I'm sitting in the neurologist's office and I'm going off about, my job is just so stressful. There's really no time for myself. It's like I'm working every weekend. And he just stops me in the middle of it. He's like, stop. I can prescribe you Lexapro. I was just like, I'm talking about this job and the environment and how I need a life change. And he's like, but you're not really going to leave your job, are you? So, I mean, the Lexapro will help. To me, it was just, especially as a psychiatrist, it was such a wake up. Like, if you want to change this, Kristine, if you want this to be different, you have to be the one that makes the decision to do something differently, to really change the fabric of how your life is currently flowing. So that moment was a wake up call for me to really just take it into my own hands.
That says so much about how we practice medicine and how we perceive other people's problems. It's just interesting to me that someone would go in there and just band-aid it. Like, well, you're not going to change your life, so let's medicate you instead. I will say there is a place and a time for medication, but I'm always going to be a proponent of looking at your whole life first and seeing what here isn't working. And is there a way that I can make gentle changes or sometimes radical changes in order to get myself into a place that's better and makes me feel more whole? I think a lot of our kids grow up thinking that they don't have a choice. I mean, they go to school, they're told what to do at school, they come home, they're told what to do at home. But when it comes to children and adults, when we get into this rut of the everyday, we don't realize that there's a way out. So interesting. I'm sorry that you had that experience in the first place, but it really sounds like that completely changed your life. Like you almost had to have that conversation to make the changes you needed to make to create this amazing life for yourself.
100%. I'm really not sorry about any of it. People are always talking about burnout. I'm like, burnout was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Like, there's no way that I would be living this life if I didn't experience burnout, because I would just be comfortable enough to stay where I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interestingly, when I created my company, it was in that time period of COVID where I was starting to read headlines about physicians committing suicide. The stress levels had gotten so high. The trauma of watching people die around them was so high. The hopelessness and the stress of what if I bring this illness to my family? What if I hurt somebody in my family? I mean, it was unreal back then. I remember I had just come back from maternity leave, and a month later, they called it a pandemic. And I was like, all right, here we go. I remember thinking, I could bring this home to my baby. I could bring this home to my 5-year-old. What am I thinking? When I said the Hippocratic Oath, I never thought I'd be putting my own life or the lives of my loved ones on the line by this choice. So actually, my company was born out of helping physicians heal from the burnout and the trauma that they experienced on the front lines. And then it just blossomed into this, where now I welcome families and children because the problems are the same. The situations may be different, right? The triggers may be different, but the heart of what we feel and experience, it's a very common human experience. It's what makes us human. Now, I want to hear more from you about your experience as a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And you treat adults too, Kristine?
Yeah, I do.
So, what are some of the behavioral health diagnoses that you treat? Do you have favorites?
I would say some of my most common are um, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, different forms of psychotic disorders, PTSD. Those are probably my most common.
What's some advice that you would give to parents that may have children or teens with behavioral health concerns?
I think a big part of treating behavioral health concerns are really thinking about the holistic aspect of doing so, really taking the time to consider sleep and movement, nutrition, what is the mind body integration and exercises, how is that being utilized, how are the kiddos learning to perceive and even eliminate their own mental stress, what are their spiritual or cultural beliefs and how are those being integrated into that work, the use of nature and being in nature, familial and social connections, which is so important for longevity, even the consideration of botanicals or herbs or other forms of medical systems or treatments, depending on the person or the family, whether that's Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine. Like there's so many. There are so many different approaches to healing. So if there's a certain approach that is not maybe fitting or preferred for the child or the family, that there is more exploration that can be done.
So let's take a specific example. I see kids who have ADHD all the time. And it's interesting because I'll give parents the Vanderbilt surveys. They'll fill it out and then they're like, I have this symptom. Oh my gosh, do I have ADHD too? It's through their children that they learn that they've had some maladaptive patterns that have come out during their childhood, but childhood was a long time ago, so we've kind of forgotten that, right? In your line of expertise, how would you go about treating the child with ADHD and addressing the family as a whole? Are there specific modalities that you like to use?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that comes out of that, initial conversation, is a lot of information, but one piece of information is also nutrition, because
Mm.
nutrition can have a really big impact on ADHD and how it shows up. For instance, iron deficiency can cause symptoms that look very similar to, or can even exacerbate ADHD symptoms. So that's something you might want to look into. There are certain food dyes that have been done away with in other countries, but not necessarily in the US as of yet, right? That also contribute to ADHD symptoms. So nutrition is a big piece that we like to look into. Another is sleep, how your sleep is impacted on a day-to-day basis. Kiddos with ADHD typically have a lot of sleep issues. So making sure that you're integrating some good sleep hygiene is going to be really important. Movement research shows that even for adolescents, if they are having 3 episodes of moderate to vigorous movement or exercise a week, that can actually decrease their core ADHD symptoms in adulthood. So exercise is super important for kiddos with ADHD. Mind body exercises, how are those being integrated? Like I was saying before, there's a lot of studies that show meditation, yoga, these things have an impact on ADHD symptoms. So how we're able to support kiddos and being able to integrate and utilize these different approaches. Things like executive functioning coaching, that's something that I recommend to all kiddos who have ADHD, is a process of integrating time management and organizational skill development, as well as strength-based communication and discipline skills, so that you're not just focusing on a medication. A medication can maybe help, like let's say a stimulant, which is the first line medication for ADHD. Maybe a stimulant can help in some respects, but you still need to learn the skills,
Correct.
right? And so that's where executive functioning strategies and coaching can really come in. And of course, those social connections, because a lot of kiddos with ADHD can have issues with social connections and how they respond in different situations. And it can impact their ability to establish and maintain friendships. So being able to support them in that development is really important. So it can look a lot of different ways in terms of treatment. One thing that I like to do is if I know the history has shown some deficiencies in terms of the nutrition, I will definitely get labs to make sure there's no iron deficiency, no vitamin B deficiencies, folate, vitamin D, omega-3s, like all of these things can impact how symptoms show up in terms of ADHD symptoms or anything mimicking that. Herbs or botanicals, things like omega-3s, which now there's even commercial availability for omega-3s, micronutrients, all of those things can make a big difference.
I agree. I feel like having this whole systems approach really helps to make the family more aligned with helping their child, realizing that it's not just a quick band-aid situation. Like, this is something that we may live with up through adulthood. And sometimes even during adulthood, we struggle, right? I feel like when we have the motivation to make changes for our child, it helps motivate us to make changes ourselves. I love this holistic approach that you have, Kristine. This is so helpful to hear about. How about anxiety? How do you address anxiety typically? That's something that I commonly see in my clinic setting. So,
Mm-hmm. In much of a similar way when it comes to thinking about social connections, nature, nutrition, movement, like some of these things are just so essential to our being that when they're disrupted, they're also going to exacerbate anxiety. I think in addition to that is thinking about other approaches or ways that we can be treating it, even outside of medication. One of the things about integrative medicine is really moving from the least invasive to the most invasive. So you really try to start at that angle and kind of move your way inward. And so is it music? Is it massage? Is it consideration of essential oils like lavender and sweet orange, which have data on helping children with anxiety? Things like kava or passion flower, different herbs, inositol, which is another really popular one, L-theanine, which helps with sleep as well, which a lot of kiddos with anxiety have trouble sleeping because it's quite connected when they're no longer distracted at night. So it's really looking into how their day-to-day lives are organized with their family. A big thing that comes up becomes cognitive behavioral therapy, how they're working on their thoughts. Kiddos learning how to think thoughts on purpose is like the greatest skill, adults or children. It's like the greatest skill you can ever learn in life. To be able to choose your thoughts to actually produce the emotion that you want to have instead of the one that just pops up for you is such a crucial thing in terms of being able to live a really fulfilling and peaceful life. The therapeutic part is really huge. I think integrating those other components like sleep and nutrition and movement are also really, really essential, especially for anxiety.
I think this is great. A lot of people don't know what cognitive behavioral therapy is. A common problem that I see amongst folks that are anxious is that they feel like they're the only one experiencing all of it. They feel totally alone in that emotion.
Yeah.
They envy a lot of the people that are around them that are able to do the day to day, or at least they are perceiving that the other person is able to do it easily without ever actually taking into account that that person may be having their own internal experience and not announcing it to the world, right? So, kind of in the same vein as social media, most of us are not posting pictures of ourselves where we're crying or a basket case, quote unquote. We're posting pictures of ourselves when we're at our best, when we're happy, when our families are happy, everybody's smiling for the most part, right? So when we're comparing our internal world to everybody else's external world, it's a really unfair comparison. When it comes to even ADHD, when we're seeing other people around us prospering, and again, I'm doing the air quotes for this one, it feels like we're being kicked when we're already down. And that's not necessarily the case. I tell a lot of my kids, if you look at models on a magazine, they're not superhuman. They're just like us. They're quirky like us. They make weird jokes like us. They feel scared like us. This is just a snapshot in time for them where they have their makeup on and they're posed. But we don't know the hours of preparation it took or the self-talk that it took to get them to that point. So once they hear it from that perspective, they're like, oh yeah, it's probably true. They probably did have to muster up some confidence to get themselves there. So it really normalizes that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Have you watched Inside Out too? They brought out anxiety as a character. I was always taught that anxiety was maladaptive. I didn't recognize it as a normal emotion up until that movie. That just changed everything for me. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Is anxiety a normal emotion to have?
Anxiety is an evolutionary need. Without anxiety, when a bear is coming after you, you would just stand there and get mauled, right? So there is a very real need for anxiety to be present in order for you to have self-preservation. But in our modern society, where getting attacked by a bear can be the same as someone putting up a photo on Instagram that you don't think is very flattering, it gets really tricky to see where the anxiety is necessary for survival and where it isn't. And so it's being able to disentangle, discern, and distinguish where the anxiety is maladaptive in your life. That's the place where you can consider whether therapy or other forms of treatment or coaching, what could be best and what could be needed in your particular situation. For the parents, also thinking about things like space, which is supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions, a particular form of therapy that is a parent-based treatment program for children and adolescents with anxiety or OCD or anxiety-related problems, through which the parents actually learn to respond more supportively to their anxious children and reduce accommodations that they've been making to the child's symptoms. So there's so many different ways to approach it when we're dealing with anxiety from a more maladaptive space.
That's great. I actually didn't know that space existed. I know that there was a place for something like that where the parents are taught the skill sets to be able to handle the maladaptive patterning at home. But I didn't know there was an actual name for that. That's awesome. One of the things that I was thinking of as you were speaking was the issue of performance anxiety or test taking anxiety. I've had parents bring their kids in saying they have meltdowns right before tests. or they'll start crying in the middle of a test. And that's what we're bringing with us. We're bringing this huge fear as if something terrible is going to happen to us, whereas it's just a test. What are we so afraid of? Most of the times we're afraid of what we're going to think of ourselves afterwards, or we're afraid of what other people are going to think about us afterwards. But neither one of those things is life-threatening. It's not wanting to feel the emotion by feeling another emotion, if that makes sense. If we worry about it up front, we'll be less worried afterwards, right? I don't feel like in that case
it doesn't quite work that way.
It doesn't. But then, you put it in perspective. I'm like, there's this life-saving capacity of anxiety versus maladaptive anxiety, which just wreaks havoc in inappropriate times and situations. When you really boil it down and talk about it, it's so easy to be like, oh, yes, I'm getting upset about taking a test and what I'm going to think of myself afterwards. It's really not a big deal so long as I have my back. So now how do I build that skill set so I reliably always have my back, even if other people don't always have my back? That's a reality too, right? We may face criticism down the line, but in the end, we have to know who we are and have that level of self-awareness and the boundary.
Yeah,
Really cool stuff.
100%. I think that that's what makes the therapeutic work around anxiety so crucial, especially for kiddos. They're learning these skills, which is such an important time to learn them, that they can take into adulthood where all the same problems will show up. So
Yeah, and sometimes it feels scarier when you're an adult because it feels like it's on a larger scale, right? If I perform well for my company, I might be up for a promotion, and how wonderful would that be to have the extra cash or even the extra notoriety for myself? But in the end, if things fail, can I still support myself emotionally? And can I move forward and can I blast through the adversity that I'm now facing? It shows us who we can be, not just allowing ourselves to be complacent because it's safer that way. This podcast was largely designed to help us heal ourselves, and in so doing, heal generations to come. Do you have any words of advice for our listeners?
Yeah, I would say just listening to your inner voice. A lot of us will hear whispers long before we make a decision. We get an inkling, we have a sense of intuition that we need to make a move, that maybe there's something different, there's something on the horizon, something more. It can come to us in different forms. I would say don't ignore that. That is a hint that's coming to you for a reason, for your own expansion, for your own growth, for your own evolution. All it really takes is creating space for it to really hear it through and through, whether that's taking 10 minutes of silence a day to just be with yourself, whether that's taking 1 hour a week to just focus on you. But particularly for the parents, a lot of parents don't always recognize how closely kiddos are listening, emulating, and internalizing everything, right? Having that space to focus on your own health and healing is so crucial and such an important thing for them to see and for them to emulate in their own lives. And so I would just say to listen to it and follow it.
I love it. I love it. It's so true. Back in the day when I saw a larger span of ages for my practice, I saw a lot of kids who were going through college and having this feeling, why am I learning this? This is going to be completely useless for my future. Or adults who were having these major thoughts about how they were living their life, what everybody likes to call a quarter life crisis or midlife crisis. I think it's funny that we phrase it that way. Maybe it's not a crisis at all. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to awaken to something that's been happening for years, which is there's something misaligned here in my life. and feeling that urge to want to make changes so that we get back on track with what our values are and what our desires are for our life. Perhaps we should get rid of that phrasing altogether. Crisis, like, no, this is a midlife awakening. This is awesome. This is a good thing. Change can be hard, but it doesn't always have to be. It could be really joyous too.
100%. And I love that reframing that you're doing around the quarter and midlife crisis, because I think all perceived challenges or problems in life can be reframed to things that would bring us closer and closer to the things that we desire most.
True. So, Dr. Goins, it was such a pleasure to have you on today. I think your words of advice are going to resonate with our community for a really long time, if not forever. We parents bring so much to our kids, and when they grow up, they take vestiges of that with them. So I want our viewers and listeners to be able to find you. How can they best find you?
They can find me on Instagram at the Nomad MDs, on Facebook at the Nomad MDs, or on my website at thenomadmd.com.
Awesome. Thank you again, Kristine, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing, give this podcast a 5-star rating and share it with your friends and family. If you want to learn more about my mom and what she does, visit her at imwellmd.com and subscribe to her email list. If you leave her a comment, you might just get a shout out in her next podcast episode. If you'd like coaching or support, she has programs available for you and your whole family. My mom is a great pediatrician and a great person, and I hope you like her podcast episodes. Have a great day. Goodbye.